All right, everybody, welcome back to the Unraveler Show with me and my co-host for the series, William Vincent, aka Willie from Duck Dynasty. This is a great time. We're having a blast during the series. So we're so sorry about last week with having to miss the episode. William, how's your dad doing? Is everything okay?
He's doing better. Thankfully, just he has a lot of health conditions going on. Part of that is rheumatoid arthritis that has settled in his ears, and he has had some tremendous pain out of that. Several things. So, but just glad he seems to be okay. They seem to have the infection under control and feeling better at least. So.
I'm really glad to hear that. That's great. Well, thank you for being able to be here tonight. It's really wonderful. This is episode 3 in our series, and it's been a lot of fun. We're going chapter by chapter in your particular book, and then as my book kind of intervenes, we talk about that, which we haven't done much of yet, but that's okay. Not necessary. We're doing quite fine dealing with your chapters. It's been a lot of fun. So, our first week, we dealt with your chapter on the fact that you stated that atheism is a religion. And so, what we established, if I recall correctly, is that atheism in itself is not a system of religion, but that atheists, plural, do in fact have systems of theology and philosophy or whatever it may be. We have worldviews, so to speak. So, atheism is not a worldview, but atheists, plural, do have worldviews. I think that's what we kind of concluded. So that was a great compromise. It was a great way to arrive at some sort of conclusion on that first chapter and realizing that there is a difference between a system called atheism versus atheists as individuals. And then atheism being vindicated by science was chapter 2. And what we talked about there was that I at least don't look to science to vindicate atheism because what I argued for was that um, was that as an atheist, I am open to having any sort of evidence that can be presented consistently. I just need to know what that system is, and it needs to be able to be tested, something that we can both agree to and say, hey, even if it's not science, this system works. And if we can use this system, whatever that may be, okay, great. Once we've established a consistency in that, then we can use that system and come to a conclusion as to whether God exists or not. So going on chapter 2, my point was that I'm not actually using science to vindicate atheism. I don't think that's the point. I don't think that I am arguing that because science proves God doesn't exist or something like that, that therefore he doesn't. I don't think science proves God doesn't exist. I don't see that at all. I don't see science proving he does exist either. I see science as a moot point regarding whether or not God exists. Um, but I've yet to find a standard, a system, a method in which we can evaluate whether or not God exists. And that's kind of what we talked about in the last episode that we had. So we've yet to discover what that method may or may not be that can prove empirically that God does exist, or even not empirically, just something that we can use to test it, to prove it, to be able to have multiple people come in and say, hey, yes, we all agree on this method and evaluate. I've yet to see what that method is. So in that regard, chapter 2 is kind of moot as far as atheism as a system is concerned. But as atheists, maybe, who knows? We've yet to figure that out. So would you agree that that's kind of where we are so far in our discussions?
Yeah, sort of following this sort of progression of, and again, the style that the book tries to follow is it tries to introduce what I think is a bad argument or a bad um, uh, position, and then it tries to start from there and maybe outline what a better framing of the discussion is, and maybe define terms a little bit more clearly. So, in terms of the idea that science vindicates atheism, I mean that's sort of a maybe a simple statement and probably low hanging fruit, and maybe everybody mostly doesn't sort of buy into that, but there are people maybe that do think, well, science is vindicated atheism, but the bigger point for me too is, Alan, is that when we're talking about science and atheism or science and religion, so I think we'll kind of go into that a bit today. We're actually talking about maybe uh, two different ways of measuring and looking at things and asking different sorts of questions. It's what's called mixing disciplines, and so I think that's important to realize as well. And so I think as we kind of get into this chapter today, I'll be able to answer a bit more and flesh out a bit more of the ideas there. But essentially, yes, that science is a sort of a system of measuring things. And again, I don't want to jump too quickly into that because think we'll probably really revisit that part again today. But it's essentially a system of measuring things, and it doesn't really have the capacity, the discipline of science doesn't have the capacity to say whether or not something like God exists. And, the first kind of response someone might have to that was, well, if it can't say whether God does or doesn't exist, then maybe the question of whether God exists is not a really good question. I don't think that's the case because I think there's other things that we would agree that have existence that are important that science can also not say whether they really have existence or not. And I think we talked about things like art, beautiful things. I think even evil things, dark things that we'd all agree that we don't want in our world, if possible. Those things are not necessarily things that science can say evil exists or good exists. Science doesn't say those things. It doesn't say that at all. It says this is how much something weighs. This is how hot it gets. This is how long it is. And if we do this certain thing will happen almost every time. It'll happen every time. That's what science says. It doesn't say things about religion. So if we're going to discuss the existence of God, then we're going to discuss that maybe at times parallel to science, but we're not really going to be asking a scientific question there.
Okay, so first off, it sounds like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like you would agree with me that using science, using empirical data, using empirical evidence, using anything that can be verified empirically in that way is utterly useless in defending or proving the existence of God.
I definitely would think that it can't prove or disprove the existence of God. The reason why is because the question itself is outside of what it can answer. And I think at some point in the book we will talk about evidence for God, and that's when we'll start talking about. I'll bring in another concept is that of information being consistent with a hypothesis. Okay, and that's the sort of the way we establish a reality or truth, like in a court of law, is you don't ever have the absolute. There's not an empirical answer to be had in a court of law. Not typically, not unless in a very rare instances. Most of the time, you're looking for information that's consistent with a hypothesis, and a jury or a judge is given this information, and they're asked to say, does this information fit the prosecuting attorney's theory, or does it fit the defending attorney's theory? And then they're asked to give a verdict or the truth based on whether the evidence is consistent with this sort of hypothesis that's put forward. So I wouldn't go as far as to say science has nothing to tell us about this. And that's not always trying to make it easy for Christians, because I think Christians have problems with science. And so it's not just saying, well, it can't tell us, so we should ignore it. I just think it's important to understand that there's a bit more to go further in that discussion that science can't take us. And I'll say this and sort of kind of let you respond. And I want to go back to that because I do think it's important for me to say, from my perspective, that when Christians or any sort of religious view make statements or claims about the nature of reality that are clearly opposed to what we see in reality, that is a problem. And I don't think we can ignore that. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying we should pretend like the earth is only 6,000 years old. because some people believe that's the case. When we look at the universe and it seems to be much older than that, I don't think you get a free pass and say, well, science can't tell us. Well, science can tell us some things that do correlate to religion. So I don't want to give myself a free pass, and I don't want to totally disconnect the value of science to the question. Just saying that, realizing it can't answer the question by itself, if that makes sense.
Um, I I hear what you're saying, and to some degree it makes sense. But my concern is if science can't answer the question by itself, what is necessary to science make a conclusion? Because I guess my problem is if you need something else in addition to the scientific evidence to get to your point, then why is the scientific evidence necessary at all? Why don't you just use whatever is necessary to get to your point? Why add this layer of science? Why not just say, who cares about science? It's just this. And I'm going to say faith, right? Is that your conclusion? It's going to be faith, right?
Yeah, if I don't think science is fake. No, is that what you were asking?
But so I said faith, Faith. Is that what you said? Faith?
No, I thought, are you asking whether I believe science is fake, or I
No,
don't
not
believe
fake.
science is fake?
Not fake. Faith. Faith. Faith.
Science is no, I don't think science is faith.
No, I agree with you. What I'm saying is if what is the additional what is the additional portion of evidence, whatever it is that you're going to say gets you to God, that you get added on to science to get there. So I'm saying it's faith, Faith, right? That's what you're going to say.
No, I get your question now. No, the rest of the distance is not necessarily covered by faith, because faith, I think the way you're using it is sort of like this leap from one point of knowledge to another without any good reason to do so. No, 1,000 times no. I do think there's a point for that, and I'll admit that I believe there's a point where you have to come to a conclusion, and I don't think, and I think this is as basically the truth for all sort of truth claims and conclusions. At some point, you have to, as an individual, say, I think this is true. I think this is the way things are. I think this is what the evidence is most consistent with. Some people do that. Some people are dishonest. Some people don't care what the evidence is consistent with, and they believe what's most comfortable. And I admit that, and that's probably on both sides of this discussion. But no, I personally, I don't want to just say, well, science takes us so far, so we'll just jump to the rest of the way. But what I do also want to show is there are other disciplines, and they're not just contrived, made up disciplines so we can believe in God. There are real disciplines that I think all human beings would admit that we have. I mean, there's again, we write, we have poetry, we paint, we do architecture, we have all kind of social structures. There's a lot of different sort of, there's political science, there's philosophy, there's psychology, there's all sorts of things that we can use to measure and give us information. And I guess one of the things I should probably really work hard to establish here is science doesn't give us all kinds of information. It just gives us a very certain kind of information. It's a very effective sort of information. It's a very powerful kind of information, but it is a very limited scope of the kind of information science gives. And so if a person is saying, well, if I can't prove God exists only using science, then that person is going to, if they want to be consistent, they've also got to say anything that I can't prove exists just by using science must also not exist and also be irrelevant. And I think when we start exploring that part of it, it becomes evident that hopefully most people wouldn't agree with that, because there are so many things that are human and extremely important to human existence that we can't prove that they are true, that they are right, using the methodology of science.
Okay, so hang on. Number one, I'm not familiar with atheism as a position saying because science can't prove it exists means it doesn't. All right. So that takes us back to chapter one, where I've already claimed atheism is not a position that makes a systematic statement that says all things don't exist because science says it doesn't. That's not at all a position. If science can't validate it, then all we're saying is I have no reason to think it does. But that doesn't mean it doesn't. It just means what reason do I have to think it does? Why would I establish a lifeline based on something that I have no reason to believe exists? That's entirely different than saying I know for certain that the spaghetti monster, flying spaghetti monster doesn't exist. I don't know that it doesn't, but I'm not going to base my life on a rule book by the flying spaghetti monster simply because somebody says, well, I think there's good reason to believe he does exist. No, there isn't. I haven't seen it. I need more than just I think it does. That's not enough for me.
Well,
So
I mean, just to be fair, if we're going to say the atheism is not a worldview, but atheists have worldviews,
sure.
then you can't really argue that atheists don't say this because some atheists do say that.
Well, they may, but I'm not arguing for all atheists. This
Sure.
is me having
So just
conversation.
to
I
be
don't.
fair with that, so if I'm not, I may not be arguing with you,
Yeah.
but there are people out there that will and
That's
that
fine,
do
but
make
there's going
that
to be idiot. There's going to be idiot Christians out there too arguing stupid shit. So I mean, I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to you. So right. So this is just our worldviews, and I'm telling you, I don't share what you're suggesting as an atheistic worldview. I don't make the claim because I can't prove the flying spaghetti monster doesn't exist, that therefore it doesn't. I don't know if it does or doesn't. What I can tell you is I'm not going to live my life for it. So even if I found a book by it in the gutter somewhere and it said written by the Flying Spaghetti Monster, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be like, oh my God, I'm going to live my life by this. No, I wouldn't do that.
sure,
That,
sure.
but that's what Christians do. Like God might be an option, so I'm going to live my whole life based on this rule book by some possible God. That's my concern with Christianity. And
And that's what we're working through this thing layer by layer because that's not it could be what happens for some people. I'm sure it is. I mean, from a psychological standpoint, most people don't fact check. That's the reason there's clinically provable data that shows why people can be conned is because most people don't fact check. We just assume that what we're told is probably true unless it directly affects us. If I were to say, hey, Alan, I'm an airplane pilot and I've got my pilot's license, that when we get through this episode, I'm going to fly to Bermuda. You probably would be like, okay, whatever. You're not going to be like, hold on, before I believe that, let me check and see if you're actually a pilot. That's just so, yeah, people do make assumptions. We do make leaps. I get that. But
that's not the same kind of leap, though. Not in any way, shape, or form.
I think it may be, though. I think it is that same.
No, because the possibility of you actually having a license that I didn't know about and that you could actually fly to Bermuda is not impossible. That's like completely doable. That's like 1,000 people could do that. Like that's it's not completely inconsistent with logic. I may just not know that
Right.
information about you, but if you said it to me, I'd be like, oh, that's cool. I didn't like I wouldn't need you to prove that to me. I wouldn't be like, show me your license, William. Literally, if you just said that this is true and you were gonna, I'd be like, wow, that's the coolest thing ever. And I would just literally believe you because I have no
Sure.
reason not to, because you're a
That's
trustworthy person and I
that's
see you.
psychologically correct. Most people
Yeah.
do. That's why people can, again, that's the reason con artists are successful very often is because nobody checks. And so I guess the point there was probably
Well,
there.
I mean, I would check in with somebody I don't know, but this is you. You and I have now somewhat of a history together. I have no reason to doubt
But
you.
we had there's people who actually flew airplanes with people in them who were actually not pilots. So this is
Yeah, and I
uh,
think those people were idiots.
they were well, we're all idiots at times, and I guess that's the point. So, but but for me, I don't want to just so no, I don't want to say, well, science cannot prove. So, and this is personal. It's not good enough for me to say science can't. If science can't prove whether God exists or not, so I'll believe in God. That's not good enough for me. It's not because there's plenty of things that science might, and I'm saying it myself. I'm arguing that science may not be able to prove a lot of things that probably exist that are important and just because the science can't prove it doesn't exist doesn't mean it does exist. Science may not be able to prove that there is a flying spaghetti monster. It's certainly not going to make me think, well, there's probably a flying spaghetti monster because science can't prove. So I'm not, no, that's not a conclusion I'm satisfied with. But what I do want to establish before I move too far away from that is there's only so much you can establish with empirical measurements. Okay. And so the way science, science wasn't invented like, a few hundred years ago. Science has been is really sort of been kind of accumulated knowledge over history, human history for a very long time. And and what science really is it's trying to say what's predictable. What can we predict will happen based off cause and effect? So if I do this thing, then it's probably the probability that this thing happening if I do this other thing is like 100%. That's what science is trying to do. If I take a heat source and I raise the temperature of water to a certain temperature, it's going to boil 100% of the time. Depends on elevation, but it's going to boil every time, and that's what science says. Science says these are material facts. You do this, this happens, and that's what science does. It's cause and effect, um, sort of measurement, but it's not. And I do not believe it's the only valid source of rational measurement. I don't think it's the only valid source of information, and I think that when we make that assumption that it is, then we limit our ability to interact with the world successfully.
Fair enough. And so I again I say fine. I'm open to knowing what other method we can measure things by that can be tested in by every person and come out with the same conclusion. Like all I tend to hear from Christians is, well, my experience with God says blah blah blah. I had these moments with God, or there's too many things that happened to me, and it all comes down to me, my experience, and me and I and me, and I'm like, okay, well, can you tell me how to duplicate those experiences? No, God just has to come to you, and I'm like, so I mean, really, it literally comes down to a person claiming stuff without any sort of testable methodical system. Science is the only one I know of by which we can test things. So if you're going to propose another one, fine. I'm open to that. And you might be the first person in history to propose one by which we can all look at and test and agree with and all come to the same conclusions. Dude, if you can give me a system by which I can test God and conclude the same thing you do, I am so open to that, but I can't. One of the examples you've given several times is, well, we have art and philosophy and music and whatever, and everybody has different opinions on the beauty of it or whatever. Okay, yeah, that's true. But I would never come and say to you, oh, look at this piece of art. I bank my life on it that this is the only true and perfect piece of art. I wouldn't live my life like that. That would be stupid. That's called an opinion. Because when it comes to art and music and things of the sort, it is very fluctuating. It's more because that's the way it is. We have opinions on those sorts of things. They're not testable the way science is. So I can't say to you that I have any system by which to test that this particular piece of art is the only true one and perfect piece of art that everybody must submit to and base their life on. That would be ridiculous. Nobody would do that. So I don't do that either. So I don't think that's a good way to determine whether God exists or not, because it sounds to me like you're saying you're determining God's existence in the exact same way. God seems to be the most wonderful thing, so I'm going to say I bank my life that this is the only one and true God, much like I would do with that piece of art. Why would you build your life around that? That doesn't make any sense to me.
So what are you living your life around now?
Well, right now I'm building my life around the best possible evidence that I have. So the difference between me and what a Christian would do is I say, this is what I see empirically. This is the best information we have. Do I know that I know that I know that I know 100% without doubt that this is absolutely accurate? No, I don't. But what I can say is this seems to be the best thing that we have available to us right now. So until new information presents itself, I'm going to live my life based on this.
But
The
you're living
Christian,
your life every day, correct?
what's that?
But you're living every day.
I am, and that's correct. The difference between what I'm saying and what the Christian says is I know that I know that I know that God exists and I'm going to bank my life on him. And they don't actually know.
But
They're
but Alan,
guessing.
aren't you banking your life on you know that you know that you know that God doesn't
No,
exist?
I'm not. And the difference is because if a new piece of information presented itself, I'd jump ship in a heartbeat. I would 100% say, oh, that was wrong. So I'm basing my life currently on what I know to be true or what I think to be true based on the amount of information I have. But I am not claiming with 100% certainty that this is correct. Christians, on the other hand, without any certainty, claim they know that I am know with 100%. No, you don't. You have no freaking clue with 100% certainty that Yahweh is true any more than the flying spaghetti monster or the Big Bang Theory. Nobody actually knows. And my beef is not with somebody saying, you know, I think God's the best possible way because this seems like a good possibility. The reason I have a problem with that, William, is because they're not saying this is the way I'm going to choose my life because it seems to be one of the best possibilities. No, they're lying and they're saying, I know with 100% certainty that God is the absolute truth. They don't know and they're living a lie. And that's my problem with it. I
Why,
hope you see
why,
the
would-
difference between them.
why would it bother you that I have two questions. I want to get back to how you're making decisions about your life because I don't see a real difference between how you're living your life and the way what you're complaining about most Christians do. Um, because I feel like you don't know all the answers, but you feel like you have to work with the best information you have to make the best decision. And you're kind of saying, I can't really prove that the decision I'm making is the best. I think it may be the best. I feel like it's the best. If I could use this word, I believe it's the best, but I don't know that it's the best. Okay. And I'm saying the same thing back to you as a theist. I'm saying, I don't know for sure.
No, but that's
That-
right there. You just
right.
ended your whole theology. Like
How
that
did I do that? I mean, you're assuming I ended it, but you're not correct in that. But I'll let you go ahead and unpack it.
by admitting that you don't know for sure, you have just absolutely claimed that Yahweh is not an absolute certainty.
No, I said I don't know.
What? That's the same thing. Yahweh's not an absolute certainty.
Okay, but do you know how exactly large the universe is?
I don't.
Is the universe a certainty?
That is, yes.
Okay, so then you just because I'm not certain, it's not making me say that I don't know what exists. I'm
No,
just
but the
admitting there's
difference
a
is
lot of
science.
things I don't know.
Yeah, but we know you and I would both agree. We know for certain that the universe exists. Like that's a big difference
Sure.
because it's been empirically proven. Like that's not even remotely the same thing. Like okay, let's talk about the flying spaghetti monster. Someone comes along and says a flying spaghetti monster exists, and I know with 100% certainty. And I'd say no, you don't. And they'd say yeah, I do. And then they would turn around and say, oh, how do you know the universe exists? And like that's the same thing you're saying.
Not really, because the flying spaghetti monster is sort of a thought experiment um, to show that you can't always determine existence by not being able to disprove existence. But the flying spaghetti monster is not the same in the fact that reason me and you are having this conversation is because we both exist. And we both exist in a world where knowledge is possible. We can know things, but
Well,
there's a
that's not
lot of
necessarily true.
unknowns, right?
That's not necessarily true.
But we are, so knowledge isn't known, or I don't, what do you disagree with there?
Well, I disagree that the reason we're having the conversation is for certain that we exist and that we don't know that. Like we are agreeing for the sake of conversation based upon our experience and the knowledge we do have that in all likelihood we actually exist and are having this conversation. But dude, like there's no way we can know for certain. We could literally be brains in a vat.
So then, based on your earlier argument, Alan, then you'd have to just deny your own existence, right?
No, I would have to deny my own existence only if we neither one of us were willing to agree that we both exist, but yet we do. We're having this conversation because you and I can come to terms on certain things. Like
Right, but mhm.
the reason you and I can have conversation is because
Mhm.
you and I are both willing to recognize the probability that we aren't just brains in a vat or imagination experiences by aliens, but that we actually exist. And I'm willing to conclude that. I'm like, yeah, in all likelihood, that's correct. I mean, hard solipsism is an impossible thing to overcome. There is no answer to it, dude. You can't prove that it's wrong as a Christian or an atheist. It doesn't matter. There's no freaking way we can possibly know that we aren't just non really existent beings. We assume we aren't. And
I 100% agree with you. And that's the reason the very foundation of rationality is a faith leap that I exist. I
I
can't
don't think it's
really act rationally in the world. So the opposite of that is for me to say, I don't know if I exist, so I probably shouldn't make any action because I don't know whether it's important or not. And that's irrational, okay? It'll probably soon lead to my demise. I'd probably starve to death or something crazy like that. So to begin with, we start with this sort of accepted assumption. Why? Because even though we can't prove it 100%, it means that the opposite conclusion is irrational. If I say I don't exist, then that means that I live in a world of irrationality, which makes none of this conversation valuable at all. So, so I
If you
guess what I'm
said that,
saying,
if you said that, we would literally not be having this show.
right? It makes zero sense to
It would
the.
make zero sense. Yes.
Yeah, so we have to start with the fact that I think, and this is where I really would like to get to with this discussion, because I think if I were to say, I believe that a being existed and it's created this dimension somewhere that we have no access to and no evidence for, you would probably be like, uh, that sounds great, Will. Have you talked to your doctor lately? Are you taking your meds? Where are you at? Because that's a really insane thought process. But we're talking about things we do know exist. The universe exists. The solar system exists.
Yes.
Human life exists. Animals exist. Things exist.
Yes.
And then they don't just exist because the desk in front of me exists, but it isn't asking any questions about the nature of its existence. Squirrels and chimpanzees and sharks don't tend to sit around and think, how should I react to the universe? Why am I here? So there's that layer of we're here, we're aware that we're here, we're self-aware. And so that leads us to these questions of what does that mean? Why is this existence the way it is? So these questions that leave the shore of empirical science and go into the waters of philosophy and rationality and rational deduction, they're not contrived. They're not just because I need something to feel good. They're because I live in a world filled with uncertainties, with a brain that has the capacity to map uncertainties, and there's that compulsion to understand. Okay, so maybe my understanding is wrong. Okay, I could be 100% wrong about everything I'm thinking. Okay, but the reason I'm asking those questions is not a wrong. There's not. It's not. I'm ignorant or I'm goofy or just got brainwashed and indoctrinated. Sure, I could say that the religion that I was exposed to is particular to my culture, but this is not a limited phenomena. Every place that we have found human beings, I've been recently doing a lot of uh, YouTube video watching on Neanderthals and pre what people call pre-human sort of hominids, and we see evidence of religious type behavior even that far back, to the point, and this kind of gets me where I think I'd like to talk about today is I don't think I want, and let me say this, let me throw this out here. I want to throw this out and I want you to respond to it and see what you think. And I'll kind of segue into it. There was a book that was really important to me one time, and it was by a guy by the name of Clark Strand. And he wrote a book, and the title of the book was How to Believe in God When You Don't Believe in Religion. It's a really cool book. It's more like a book of Buddhist koans based on the New Testament. It really isn't as philosophical as it sounds like, but the title of it kind of gives me that dichotomy of you could believe in God and not be a religious person. So when we're talking about religion, we're talking about a particular human phenomena and how it relates to the idea of God. And I think that's what I'd like to talk about a little bit. I'd like to first of all get your thoughts on it. What do you think about that dichotomy? You could believe in God, but that doesn't make you religious. You could you be religious and not believe in God? I don't know. I'll let you respond. What do you think about that?
So, I mean, we started out the show and even our private phone call before the show where I agreed that if you could manage to have religion be um, a uh, a system of thought that would include morality and isolate it from, say, philosophy, and this would be the sphere in which we talk about morality. It would be religion. I'd be fine with that as long as we excluded a god from it, because I see no reason to believe in a god. So to answer your question, I think you can have religion without God, and I think some religions do actually not have God. Not, I mean, not entirely, but some within that religion, like Buddhism, for example. Not all would hold
Right. Yes.
God. So I do think you can theoretically have religion without God, and I'm not opposed to that. I'm opposed to religion by and large because, for the most part, I think it wreaks more damage than it does good. Um, that's not the topic of the show, but either way, I do. I think it's a problem in general, but I don't think it's unredeemable. I think we can redeem it in theory, and bring it back to the surface and fix that problem and have it be our sphere of conversation, as long as you exclude God. Can you have it the other way? I'm not sure you can. I don't know that you can have God without religion because I think I think from that side it goes hand in hand. Because immediately as soon as you have a God, that God starts demanding ways of living and rules and bystanders and things like that. So that immediately becomes a philosophy of life, a religion, that rules that you have to live by. So no, I don't think you can have a God without religion, but I think you can do it the other way in theory.
Yeah, yeah, and well, people would probably debate and argue that. Now, I'll say a second thing. This is my personal view, and I'm setting up because I think chapter two I talked about God and science, and so this is why chapter three is a different topic. It's religion and science. Okay,
Well, chapter three specifically is faith versus science.
yeah. So, and faith is the embodiment of religion. Religion is the practice of faith. Okay,
I
so.
mean, I don't know that that's true if you just take what I just said. Because if you're just talking about religion being a system where we discuss morality, I don't think you need faith for that.
Well, and like say for the Buddhist religion typically describes itself as atheistic. They don't make it, they're at least agnostic. Typical Buddhists or wouldn't make a statement whether God exists or doesn't exist according to that sort of philosophy. It's not
So it's not
relevant.
faith based, is my
Yeah,
point.
it's not really relevant to what they're discussing, what they're looking at, but it does have a religious nature. It has concepts like karma and samsara, so in cycles of birth, rebirth. So there are some religious aspects to it, even though it doesn't affirm a deity. So I think you could have a religious sort of engagement with the world without a particular sort of theistic God. And I'm glad that you said that you could be religious that way, or you said, well, could you do the opposite? Could you believe in a God, have a spiritual? I think shamanism and human religion is probably the closest to that, because in shamanism you don't really have a formal system of theology and dogmatics. You have more of a sort of a mysticism about the world, but it really doesn't it isn't as crystallized and defined as sort of a theistic religion that says this is how God exists, this is how man exists. So I think you might could, some shamanism, maybe some Eastern Northern European religions may have had a more of a mystical type of loose. So in other words, there is, and this is where I'm getting to, and I'm trying to. I don't think I think religion, and I think what we've done here is we've kind of showed the spectrum. Religion can have the spectrum of how people engage with it. And I think because of that, I'm going to say something, and I'm going to let you argue with me if you'd like to, but I'm going to throw it out there and let you punch at it. I don't think you can dissect human society from religion. I think human society and human social interaction is religious by nature. That doesn't, I'm not saying that that proves God exists, but I'm saying our psychology, our way of interacting, our social structures are hard to find a way to say what they are that doesn't sound like religion.
All right. So if I were to simply change one word, I would agree with you. I would say our society does not seem to survive or live or exist apart from morality. That I would agree with. I would not say it depends on religion, unless you are using religion as synonymous with morality. As I've already said multiple times, if religion is the way you are using as a system to define or discuss morality, again, I'm fine with that because that is strictly how I'm willing to discuss it. If you're going to try to throw a God into it, I need more than just, aha, you gave into religion, therefore God. Like that would be such a leap to me. It would be mind blowing. But I don't see you doing that. So I'm still stuck on why religion is such a necessary concept if morality does the job. But if you're saying religion is necessary to discuss morality, I mean, fine. I'll concede that for the sake of argument because I see no point in debating that. I don't care. We want to call it religion, call it religion. I just have a problem with theism. I see no need to believe in some God because there is no reason to believe in it. And so back to our so here we are. We've broached chapter three obviously throughout this session in case people didn't know. So we've talked about chapter one, chapter two over the first two sessions. Now we're in chapter three discussing science versus faith. And so I do see a dramatic difference between us coming to an agreement that based on our observations and based on the fact that we would like to have an intelligent conversation, we're going to agree that we're not brains in a vat. We're going to agree that life is real, that we exist, that the animals we see actually are real, the smells we smell are real. And I'm with you, man. I see no reason not to think that. There is absolutely no reason to think we don't actually exist, that we don't actually live, that we don't actually die. There's zero reason to think that that's not the case. However, we must agree it's a very good possibility. We don't know for sure, but we're going to agree for the sake of conversation that that is off the table. We literally are here and we're conversing. That's great. That's not called faith. That's called an agreement on what we observe with our senses. Whether or not those senses are accurate, we don't know. But it's not faith when you're actually using your senses to agree on a position to have a conversation. That's not the same thing. Faith is when you say, I believe that flying, forget flying spaghetti. Let's use another one. Goerings. I use that example in my book. Goerings is my stepson made up term. Came up with this monster and he drew a picture, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I was like, "Can I use that in my book?" It was so great. So Goerings is like silly little creature, and nothing that does not exist. We all know it doesn't exist. He created. It's so cool. Goerings. Goerings exist. Why? Because. Well, why? Well, because I have faith that they do. Okay, that's not the same thing as me saying, do we agree that we actually exist? Well, yeah, we agree we actually exist. We're conversing. Do we agree that Goerings exist? Well, no, I've never seen anything like that. That doesn't make any sense. Why would you make the conclusion and the illogical leap that a Goering exists? They're totally different things. It's not the same thing. It's like what I talk about in my book. Like there are two layers of faith. One I prefer to call confidence in the system by which you choose to determine things. So we each have confidence in a system. I have confidence in science to determine reality. Christians have confidence in faith to determine reality. Those second layers are entirely different. And I do not think they mix. I think they're in complete contradiction to each other. And the reason I think that is because if science was able to prove the existence of a spiritual realm in any way, shape, or form, you wouldn't need faith anymore. It would be utterly useless. And until science can prove it, all you have is faith. Faith is not compatible with science in any way, shape, or form. I am not saying that people of faith do not think that science is useful, because they certainly do. Even when I was a Christian, I would say I live my life based on science in every single sphere except my belief in God and Jesus Christ. Like that was entirely based on faith. But in every other area, I live based on science. Why is it that the only area of life we live based on faith is religion, is Christianity, is
Because it's not. That's what I've been saying the whole time. It's 100 million%, which is not a real percent, not. The vast majority of human experience is not based on science, it's based on faith. And let me plug this laptop up before I lose you here. But yeah, it's based on faith. Most of how we enter, even you said this, Alan, you said, and I agree with you, and I don't disagree. You said without morality, human society collapses. I agree with that, but morality is not an actual thing. It's not. You know what? You know what doesn't have morality? Animals don't have morality. I've seen animals give birth to offspring and stomp them into the dirt. I've seen animals devour. Animals don't have morality, and morality is not a real tangible scientific thing. But you said, and I agree with you, you said human society would deteriorate and collapse without it. I agree with it. So we're saying, so to say, well, I only apply this faith thing to God. No, we don't. We apply this faith thing to almost every important aspect of human existence. The idea of God is just one point on a spectrum of human existence and thought. And I think for me, when you say I don't need God, and this is the reason I don't need God, then you start unraveling every other thing on the way down until we get to morality. And then I can say, and this is not a thought experiment, because the fascists in the World War II era and the communists in the World War II era, and quite frankly, the UK and other imperial powers, they did a whole lot of crap in the name of They used to pull up. They would pull up in Africa with these Gatling guns and just start mowing down the indigenous tribes as they. This is heinous, immoral type things that they did. So no, if we don't, without morality, there is a collapse. There is a, and it's not hypothetical. Oh, we'll just be moral without. No, we're not. We, with the wrong philosophy in place, and I'm not saying theism is the right one at this point, but I am saying what we believe about things does affect how we behave. And with the wrong philosophy in place, the wrong thought in place, our morals do deteriorate. Right now in the Middle East, the morality is based on Islam. In Islam, while it does have some moral attributes that seem like Judaism and Christianity, there are other aspects of it that are highly immoral. If I know of an instance where a young girl was raped and she was taken out and stoned to death because, according to their moral worldview, she was it violated their laws and etc. So, point being, what we do believe about things is important to our morality, and morality is not something we can prove with science. And I'm going to say this again: the vast majority of what makes us human beings and not calculators and clocks are things that you cannot prove by empirical science, and they are things that we do accept by faith, no matter how you want to make that definition.
So let's talk about morality for a second then, because you brought this up in your whole statement there. So I think one of the problems that I'm struggling with in what you're suggesting is that I think your view is coming from the perspective of creation, that God made humans in his image, right? And so because of your presupposition that humans or humanity is different than the rest of the animals, that therefore we are unique. And I think you're drawing from that, and so you're making the statements that you are. I think that I would disagree with you in that because my opinion on it, the way I see things now, being on this side of it, is that we do things by instinct. You don't see us as animals. I see us as animals. I think we're the same. I think we've evolved. I think you still see us as unique and separate from animals because you believe in creation. And
Because
if I,
we're also on YouTube right now, and not squirrels and zebras.
well, no, that's correct because of evolution,
We
right?
are unique. Yes.
But we are unique, right? Because of evolution, but not because of creation. So you're starting with a certain presupposition. I'm starting from another one. But mine, I believe, is supported by scientific evidence. Yours is just, well, God. So that's my problem with it.
You never asked me though. You haven't asked me. So you're assuming that I think evolution is antithetical to creation. Um, I would say evolution and creation are completely compatible type of theories. Not that everybody's creation works with that, but evolution could be a methodology to create a certain kind of life form.
Sure.
I'm
Okay.
not going to ignore that. Yeah.
So fine. So let's say that you believe God created from the beginning. So would you suggest then, would you agree with me that we have likely evolved from the a species before us and that God didn't make us from the dirt of the ground as humans to begin with? Is that your position?
It seems to be the case. Yes.
Okay, so you would agree with
Yeah.
that. So if you agree with that, then it would clearly say that we have evolved in our instincts, much like animals, because we have evolved to a point where we have the kind of mind that we can communicate and develop morals, unlike animals in other spheres of the kingdom. We have now developed systems of morality within cultures that we live and nations that we live. That doesn't make us less than animals, and it doesn't require faith to do that. It simply means that we have determined that we are valuable in this universe, and we have decided to create morals within our societies. The universe doesn't give two shits about us. We decided that because we've evolved to this place. And if you agree with evolution, then there's no reason you could disagree with that.
Well, there is a reason why, because it's not the case, right? When we say morality, when you started with the word morality, we both agreed that it is something so essential to human functioning that without it, society collapses. Um,
Humanity, yes, because
but that's not something that doesn't sound like then something that you created
it
just
is
because
though,
of
because like if you
preference.
think about it, the only reason we're surviving as a human race and staying in the sphere that we have evolved to is because of morality. That's what we've created. And every system has its different morals, but the fact is, the fact that we're living by within that societal's morals, that's how we are surviving and existing.
And you'd have to say that morality also created us.
No. Why?
How would it not have? If we can't exist without it, and without it we collapse, and it is something that's made us what we are, then morality has formed, shaped, and created. I'm not saying it's a sentient being. Don't take the leap, but morality itself would have to have formed the human species the way it is now. So you
Yeah,
would
no,
have to say that.
I would not say that it created us. I would not say that we've evolved because of morality. I would say morality is a result of our evolution. I think they're totally different. And in fact, you can actually see forms of morality in the animal kingdom outside of the human race. We just don't normally call it morality. Like you can see, and I talk about this in my book. Jordan Peterson discusses it quite a bit. How there are tribes of gorillas and monkeys that actually have learned to protect their territory from outsiders, and they have certain rules in which by which they live. And so, even somebody who comes in and tries to take over the territory, they have learned to defend their territory and protect their innocent. That's morality. Like that's the same thing we're talking about. The problem is when you come at morality from a biblical worldview, you can only think of it as in terms of something objective, as though it only has one way to think of things. But morality is not that strict when you take God out of it.
But
You
that's
can
not what you're. But the example you're giving there, though, Alan, is not consistent with that because so let's say we've got 5 tribes of gorilla, right? And
yeah.
one tribe says we're going to protect our innocent, we're going to protect our land, and they survive. And the other 4 tribes don't because they're not moral. Then what we said is morality at this point is not just something people pick because they liked it. It is a real thing that caused a real result. And if that result is only the survival of that particular species, it's still created a result. This is it, so you can't say it's just something that we determine. And here's something, and I will give you this because this is something for you to think about. That doesn't mean that you have to jump into, well, that means I believe in God. No, you could just simply say that living this certain way has this effect. Okay. But that thing we call morality is a powerful force shaping human life, shaping human culture, shaping human civilization, so much so that me and you today is hardwired into us that this is how people should behave. Okay.
Well, okay, so what I'm saying is because of this gorilla example we're giving, and because we've evolved, we've been able to say, hey, that worked well. Let's make better morals for our society so that we survive and do even better for each other. Like that's what I'm suggesting.
Okay. Then that makes morality a force, something like gravity. Not the same, but similar. It's a force, it's a real force. Now, here's what's going to happen. The more I start outlining these sorts of forces that shape and create, and you start accumulating them, they're going to start sounding a whole lot like a very, very familiar subject. So when you talk about morality as a force, justice is a force, love is a force. Okay, what do you know that sounds like that creates and has those sorts of attributes?
Well, I would remove the word creates. That's the first thing.
Why? Because it's you don't have to be allergic to it. We know that creation happens. We just
No, I don't know the. Well, you mean like in general, like among?
sure because
Oh
we
yeah, yeah, okay,
create
okay.
things.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I thought you were trying to bring in God as the creator again of the universe. I
Oh, God's
apologize.
already there. I'm just trying to
Oh
show you
yeah,
there's
yeah.
that. But okay, creation exists, and I'm not. So just listen. Always assume that I'm not trying to leap to the easy conclusion. Okay, so when I say creation, I'm talking about the general. I can create something. I can whittle something out. I can make a laptop.
Right.
Creation exists in the world. We can make things, and that's a cool phenomenon that we're able to design tools. We
Sure.
have learned cause and effect. We can do all these cool things. So we know creation happens, and we can say these forces. Uh, you could say natural selection is sort of a creative force. Doesn't mean it's sentient. It means it is having a creative effect on the population. Okay, so and a lot of people who are not theists but just look at human anthropology say that religion and morality did help to shape us and make us successful, and that's why this is so ingrained in who we are as a species. Okay, And so that's one way to look at it from maybe a totally secular standpoint. But for me, it's this idea that, again, I can't prove morality as a force. I can't say it's a real thing. And why do we call it morality? Why do we give it this essence of good and justice and right? Where does that come from? Uh, what about those forces cause that to happen? And here's the thing, I joked about this earlier, and I kind of maybe showed my hand a little bit. I think that our views of this is absolutely true. It has to be true if you think about it. Our views of God and theology don't come directly from God. They come from our perception of the world around us. That's the reason I think that we can't just ignore theism and say, well, just it's not flying spaghetti monster. It is people looking at the world and saying, this seems to be a phenomenon, and I'm going to call it this. Okay. Now they could be wrong, but it's not contrived that they came to that conclusion. Um, so I don't I think I take an anthropological approach to this, particularly in these kind of discussions. I'm not, if God, you joked earlier, you said if God came down and you said when religion takes place, God starts telling people what to do. And I thought to myself, I said, well, if God were actually just speaking and telling people what to do, it would solve both of our problems because you'd be like, I can hear him. And I'd be like, see, he's there, right? That's
And
not
then you wouldn't need faith anymore.
right. What really happens is we believe that these things are true and we start acting because we believe they're true. Okay. So there's at least that much is absolutely true that we see the world this way and we react to it. And here's also something that's the truth. If the way we're reacting to the world is wrong, then we end up dying. Okay, as a species, we starve, we kill each other, we create ecological disasters. So if we don't obey the truth, then we end up all dying. Okay, so these are concepts that you say, well, that's all goofy about this whole morality and justice thing. Is it really, or is this an accumulated experience of humanity? Um, and I'm going to say this one thing, and I'll let you respond. I believe in God because I believe humanity is a real thing. I don't think it's just. I believe it's real. I believe human beings are real things, and therefore I believe in God.
Well, I totally agree that I believe humans are real things, and therefore I don't believe in God. So we're still at a standstill. I don't see any reason to leap to God. I don't understand that leap. It's weird to me. I'm not saying God doesn't exist. I'm saying, what reason do you have? I'm still stuck on that. Like it sounds like you're saying we don't have any other explanation for morality. We don't have any other explanation for why we exist. So therefore, God. I still hear you saying that, and I've yet to hear
No,
you.
no, no, no. What I'm not saying we don't have an explanation for morality. So God, what I'm saying is we have morality, which is an attribute of something.
Why God though?
Because the attributes are all realities, morality,
Yeah, but the
justice.
attributes you're getting about God are from your Bible. And that's the only reason you're connecting them to the same attributes you're discussing.
No, I haven't. I've got all these attributes talking about anthropology. I haven't even talked about the Bible. I don't quote the Bible in these discussions. It's irrelevant. Why? I might as well quote the phone book to you. What
Oh,
does
you're
it
right.
matter
You're right. You
what's
might
in
as
the phone book,
well.
right? So that's not a part of this discussion. No, and I get that I'm trying not to jump and take easy, debate tricks to get to a point, but I do want my thought process to be understood. And so I do feel like when I say that we come to this conclusion that God exists, it is because in most of our experiences that these forces seem to emerge that are undeniable. They're powerful. Okay, uh, cause and effect, consequences. For instance, why do I feel so strongly that I shouldn't take advantage of people? Why do I? And here's the weird thing: you're like, I don't believe in God. I'm like, yeah, you don't believe in God, but you sure act like you do. You live like you do because the way you live is you try to be a moral, truth-seeking, honest person, and that's the kind of life I think belief in God produces. Even though you say I don't believe in God, and I don't mean to cheapen your personal view, so don't take this the wrong way. I think maybe for me, I look at it as is you don't believe in all the ways of God you've heard of, but you believe in something, and that something forms how you live. And I respect the fact that you're not satisfied with the answers you've got so far. But I'm just trying to show you how I came to the answer that I have came to. So,
And I'm not going to argue the point that I have my morals because of some reason. Sure, I can give completely different reasons than God, though. Um, my question is, again, it's still William. It's still the same question. Why God? Like you still haven't drawn the connection from the 50-yard line to Yahweh. You're just literally saying all these reasons must mean God. No, they don't. Like you literally could have said exactly what you just said in that whole diatribe by saying flying fairies are the reason that I live this way.
so why would Pixie Pharaohs explain morality?
Because the same reason God could. How do you know that God explains morality except that you have a Bible that claims it does?
Because we're saying that God is morality.
Who is God? Maybe God is flying pixie fairies.
If I were to say who's Alan, right? You could say, well, Alan is, I don't know, where you work at, your family relations. None of those one thing individual descriptions of you would be you. They'd be descriptions about relating things about you. What I'm showing you is I can't show you a snapshot of God. Here's my selfie with God. We're at Daytona Beach. Can't happen. But what I can show you is things that exist that are attributes of what I believe God is.
Okay, well, there you go. What you believe God is, that you just stated, that you're back to faith. So, what I'm asking is, what grounds other than faith in your Bible that describe these attributes of God do you have to think that all of these conclusions you've drawn must mean they are God? I,
Well,
it's still making a
before,
leap to say it's got to be God instead of 1,000 billion other options that it could be.
why is it wrong for me to make that sort of leap when I can make the same sort of leap to accept my own existence? Why is it wrong to make one sort of leap, but the other one isn't right? Because in one instance, I'm saying I accept this as a reality because other options are absurd. So I'm going to accept by faith that I exist. Why would I not do the same thing and say, well, if all these sort of forces and hierarchies of knowledge, power, whatever exists, why is it wrong for me to make that same leap on the other side?
Because you can actually uh, touch yourself and pull your beard and validate with your own words that you actually exist. Even if we are brains in a vat, the fact that, again, as we agreed at the beginning, we're going to conclude that we're not, and we're going to assume that we're not. So, I mean, I'm skipping all of that for the sake of saying, here we are, we're in a conversation, and we're using science and empirical data. And with science alone, there is zero reason, William, with science alone, there's no way you can tell me that you don't exist and I don't exist. We can prove this empirically, 100%. I can beat myself in the head 50 times just to prove it to you. Like we absolutely
You can prove that you can prove to yourself that you believe you exist. But
no,
outside
and I
of
can prove
that,
to
you
you
can't.
that I exist if we're using the same empirical data.
Not based on empirical data, you can't. You could be
Yeah,
an AI generated image. I don't know. I mean, I can't. You can. I believe it's
well,
true
right now because
because
we're
it seems.
virtual, but I bet you I could fly out to you and you could touch me in the same way that you're going to use your Jesus example where Thomas put his hands in his finger in his holes in his hand. Oh, because the empirical data proved to him that Jesus was alive. So if you're going to use that to prove that Jesus was alive, then you can't tell me that you can't prove that I'm alive.
Well, I can prove to you that I think you're alive.
Well, then
I can prove to myself that I think you're alive.
But
Really, there's
that's a self-defeating argument then, because if Thomas couldn't prove with 100% certainty that Jesus was alive, then you can't prove 100% certainty
no.
either.
It's not self-defeating because what we're establishing is you can't really claim to know anything without faith. Science depends on faith.
Okay, so now we're back to faith versus science, and this is where I'm saying I disagree. Science depends on confidence in that particular method and saying, I trust this method to prove things. You and I both share the same confidence in science. We don't share the same confidence in faith. Faith is a second layer, science is a second layer. We are in total disagreement between science and faith. You use science for most of your life, but in this one area, you use faith and you say, God exists and God must be the answer for all of these things that I'm saying. And I still don't see the reason for God. I see, fine, you want to have faith. Okay, let's just pretend like I grant you faith as a verifiable method. I still don't see how that faith gets you to God. I see it gets you to something invisible, non existent, non tangible, non scientific. But I would still need you to give me some reason, some method of faith by which we can measure that it's got to be Yahweh. I don't see it.
Well, I think part of the problem, the first part of the problem is when you're talking about Yahweh, you're talking about the way God is typically described in a lot of religious settings. It's very anthropomorphic, simplistic, ignorant at times. And when I'm talking about God, I'm here in these discussions. I'm not talking about that sort of description of God. That description of God as an old man in heaven, kind of running everything by switchboard, that kind of stuff. And I get that. That's goofy, and maybe it has value. I'm not going to say that, because stories do have value, and the way we tell stories have value. But the reality is that's a very naive, not very well deeply thought out way of. So when I'm talking about God, I'm not talking about that. And I think sometimes you're like, tell me how to prove that exists. I don't really even know if I want to, because I don't know that that's valuable to you at all. Um, Maybe it isn't, maybe it isn't. What I'm talking about is a more philosophical argument about God that's what's called classical theism. And it is nuanced, it's based on thought, it's based on philosophy, it's based on measuring experiences. And that's kind of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about God's existence. As a matter of fact, I can't remember the guy's name, classic theist, that said that we should say that God doesn't exist. And the reason he said that is because if in classical theism, everything that has existence is contingent upon being itself. And so that God, the God of classical theism, precedes existence. It's the thing that existence is predicated upon. Everything else that exists because of something else, except for this one thing. And this one thing is what Aristotle and Plato may have called prime movers, initial cause. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the existence of God. And I'll say that and say that itself is unsatisfactory. I think I can make you an absolutely strong argument for classical theism from a philosophical point of view. But at the end of the day, we don't believe people and things exist because somebody proved to us that they exist. We believe that they exist because we experience their existence. Okay. Now, I may be insane. It's possible that I am, and probably many people would step up to testify that that's the case. But my
You
real
and me
reason,
both, man.
yeah, I probably could get like a bunch of people to just testify that yes, he is absolutely insane. But I want to be honest and say I think we can make these arguments, but I think at the end of the day, that itself is not going to be the satisfaction that maybe you would be looking for, because what you want to do is you don't want to just have somebody tell you, "Hey, I'm sure this exists. Let me see all this." You want to know, and I think that knowing is something that comes from experience, and it becomes from an intuitive type experience. It doesn't come from rational argumentation. Just to be
Okay.
honest.
So I'm going to take questions here in a second, but I'm going to wrap this up with, and I'll wrap it up with what I think you just said, and what I what I'm going to conclude based on what you just said, and then if you want to rebut, you can. But it sounded like you just said you need to have an experience with God in order for you to validate any of this. That's what I heard you say.
No, don't read it into it like that you're. I'm not going to name denominations, but I
And
know people talk about.
I don't mean like a Pentecostal Holy
Yeah,
Spirit.
no, I mean you need to feel as though that you have psychologically engaged with a reality.
Right. So
Okay.
what you're saying, you're arguing the Reformed epistemological case. That's what I'm hearing you do. I'm hearing you say that you have to have a moment with God that you know in your heart that He exists because He's come to you and He's given you that change. A fundamental change of heart because God has spoken to you in your heart. It doesn't have to be some charismatic experience, but just some sort of fundamental change that can only come from the Creator Himself. That's what I hear you saying.
You could describe it that way, but I think other people experience things in different ways.
That's fine, but it sounds to me like you're saying you cannot and nor can I accept any sort of empirical scientific proof for the existence of God. But the only way that one can come to conclude that God exists ultimately is if they have that empirical, that spiritual experience with God, whether it be the dramatic, charismatic one or the more soft Jeremiah or not Jeremiah, uh, uh, goodness gracious, what's the freaking prophet now? Isaiah, no, goodness, I'm having a brain fart. It's been so long since I've
It's
studied.
a prophet.
No, the prophet, Elijah. Thank you. Oh my God.
Elijah, okay.
Instead of Elijah, yeah,
Still,
Elijah.
still small voice.
The whispering
Yeah,
voice,
whispering voice in the wind. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So whatever you're expecting, but ultimately, one cannot come to believe in God unless they have had that moment with God.
I think probably. I think probably that's where I'm going to be at right now.
All
Okay.
right, so we're going to conclude then that chapter 3 also isn't a case against atheism because science and faith, therefore, are incompatible when it comes to belief in God. Science cannot take a person to God. God must come and do it by faith.
No, no, no. So I didn't, if I had said science leads people to God, that would have been wrong. What I said is it's not incompatible. So
It is though. It's
I'm looking at
incompatible
the
with
same,
it's
I'm looking at the
incompatible
same
with
facts
faith.
that I'm looking at the same facts that you look at. I'm seeing the same world you see.
Yes,
I'm not
yours leads.
denying any fact that I'm aware of that is in existence. And if I find out tomorrow what I thought was true, a material fact is different, then I will be glad to change to believe that way because I think that's rational. The point being is none of the rational facts that you could offer me, because we could flip this and say, I want you to prove to me scientifically that I shouldn't believe in God, and you'd have just as much a difficult time getting me to that conclusion.
But I
Because,
wouldn't do that. I have no reason for that.
well, we have the same reason that we're having the discussion at all, because it's an important part of our human phenomena.
Yes, but
Um,
I can't prove. I am not making a claim that no God exists. I'm simply saying, give me a reason to believe God does exist. And
I
you're
can give you reasons to do that.
no,
Okay.
what you've given me is, well, ultimately, Alan, you have to have this moment with God.
No, I was trying to be transparent there that no matter what kind of argument I give and no matter how much I try to corner you on arguments, which I do feel like the things I've stated are true. I think going back to things like the existence of things like morality are undeniable. And we even started by saying we can't even accept our own existence without some degree of faith. So those arguments are, it's not saying there's no argument. It's
No,
not
again,
saying there's no evidence.
this is once again taking me to the 50-yard line. This is what I've been arguing the whole time. You're giving me a whole bunch of great statements that take me to a 50-yard line saying, look at all these things that point to God. And I'm saying, okay, great, you got me this far. What do I need now? And you're saying, well, the rest of the way you need faith. You're doing exactly what I'm accusing Christians of doing. Dude, you've given me nothing to take me the whole way. You're simply saying these are all great arguments for the existence of God. Now you just have to have that moment with God to prove the rest of it. That's
Yeah,
insane.
yeah, but the problem is, I guess, from my perspective, is if you're looking at the world, and this is something I don't understand. I can't look. I look at the world, and nothing about it seems to say anything about it that atheists seem to say about it.
What
Um,
do atheists say about it?
I mean that there's really no real reason for anything. We just make reason up. We just kind
No,
of
atheists
create
don't.
things as we go. Evolution might as well be dominoes falling for most atheists, right?
It's not an atheism position. Like maybe some atheists say that, but you're talking to me, and I'm not arguing that from an atheism perspective. I don't know the answers. I'm saying, what answers do you have for me to prove that God exists and that I need to believe in him? I'm saying these other scientific things sound good as an atheist, and they may be right, but I'm not claiming them to be right. I'm sitting here sort of on ground zero, and I'm saying, okay, I no longer have any reason to think that this is true. This might be true, but I'm not making a claim that it is. I'm saying maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't care. That has no bearing on this conversation. What does have a bearing on this conversation is God exists, I know it, and I'm going to prove it to you. And I'm saying, okay, give me the evidence. And your evidence is, well, all these things point to God, but at the end of the day, Alan, you just have to have that experience of faith.
I think you're oversimplifying what I said a bit there. I think what I said was that I do have arguments that are consistent with the existence of God. I do think I have ways to frame those arguments. And what I said was that at the end of the day, those arguments are never going to be satisfactory because that's not how we determine the reality of another person. The reason I believe that Alan Bondar exists is not because somebody's made a great rational argument to me. It's because it seems like everything about my experience indicates that there's really a mind there that I'm interacting with. Okay. And that's what I'm trying to say is I can show you, if somebody were to come in and say, well, you know what? I don't believe Alan exists. Well, I think you've been indoctrinated, you've been brainwashed. There's all these technologies that could have, and I could say, well, that doesn't make sense because this happened and Alan did this, and I've had this phone conversation. I'm giving rational reasons to this person rejecting my experience, right? But I didn't come to the belief that you have a mind that I'm interacting with based on rational arguments. I came to that belief because I feel like I've experienced the exchange. Okay. I think that's just being honest there. And I think if you were to somehow by some whatever decide, hey, I think I want to accept some sort of form of faith. I don't think that's going to be because somebody like me sat across from me and said, hey, Alan, have you ever thought about morality? And what about chimpanzees when that's not why you're going to come to that conclusion. You're going to come to that conclusion because I experience and interrelate with the world this way, and I believe it's true. Okay.
So the
But
difference,
that's not saying that going back to the analogy, if somebody came in this room and said Alan doesn't exist, and me answering, I could give a rational framework why I believe you exist. But I know that that's not why I accept your existence. I accept your existence because I've had a human interaction with you. I know you're a
right?
person.
But that is the dramatic difference between proving I exist and proving God exists. The difference is you can give this person who doesn't believe I exist all of the reasons, and they can go and experience those exact same things with me, and therefore say, "Oh, yeah, I had those exact same experiences." You can't make me reproduce the same experiences with God. If you can, I'm asking you to show me how.
No, I think that part of it's correct. I don't want to sound as though I concede something that I don't. So we're talking about rational arguments for the existence of God are thing arguments and measurement of reality that seems to be consistent with an idea. But I think we both know we should know that at some point to be satisfied with this, and this is why today, and I'm just being totally transparent, maybe making myself a bit vulnerable here, but I'm just being real. The reason I'm a theist, if you want to call me that today, is because when I distilled everything down in my thought processes of all the things I could or could not determine whether they were true or not, I believe two things were true. I believe that I exist, and I believe that there's something that I've interacted with. The intuition I have about the universe it is true. And I don't say that the intuition I have about existence is true. And I can either choose to deny that and say, well, I don't have any evidence of it, or can I prove it? And I can spend the rest of my life trying to prove it, or I can just accept the fact that this is the way the world and the way I experience the world, this is how it is for me. And I think for me, all the arguments and all the confusion was not so much about me proving myself that God existed. It was trying to meet criteria from outside to convince me to believe what I already thought was true. And I just think that's the case. And I think if and that's the reason if you say, well, I don't believe in God, I'm not satisfied. That's not my experience. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, there's something wrong with you and you're probably possessed of the devil. I can't say that. I don't know that for you. Now, if you say, well, your belief in God is irrational, you have no reasons for that, then I'm going to say, no, I've got reasons, and we can talk through that. And I think that's fun to do. I think we can learn things that way. But I'm just being honest about where we're going to get to. I can never get you past the 50-yard line. I can't. It's impossible. Nobody can, right? Um, but the question is, and this is the question I think should be asked, should we just set at the 50-yard line and wait? Isn't this the most important question of all of our existence is why do we exist? And if we don't know, shouldn't we spend a lot of time trying to figure that out? Because that seems like the most important question we could ever ask.
Well, all good thoughts to ponder. I'm going to let you end that right there because I want to get to some questions before we end the night. Next week, though, we're going to jump to the next chapter, assuming we don't feel like we need to keep covering this. But I feel like we dealt with this chapter pretty well, and I really enjoyed the conversation. If in case anybody's wondering, I got to tell you, I love William. Him and I really get along. I'm having a blast with this. if we sound like we're coming at each other, well, we are, but it's okay because we can.
It's what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah.
Yeah, we're cool. Like I have no problem with him. I just absolutely thoroughly enjoy this conversation. So this has been great. Next week we're going to be talking about whether religion is responsible for all the evil in the world. That's your next chapter.
That should be fun. That'll be a fun one. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that'll be fun. So we I want to encourage you all if you haven't. I'm going to get to the questions in a second. So if you haven't written your question in, write it in now because I'm going to be reading through those in a second here. But I just wanted to remind everybody, grab William's book, The 10 Myths of Atheism. That's what we're going through right now, and it's a challenging book. I encourage you to read it. Maybe I disagree with his conclusions, but as we're realizing through this conversation, while he argued atheism as a system, maybe he overshot his case, but at the end of the day, he is making good points that atheists in general do make some of these terrible statements and terrible conclusions. So I would encourage you to grab the book, read it, and read it, with a critical mind, just like you would any book, including mine. I would encourage you to grab How to Kill God the Easy Way. It's a challenge and a journey to help you undo the brainwashing and eliminate the belief in God that you have because of what you've been indoctrinated to believe. Whether or not you end with the same conclusions that either of us do in our books, they're very good books. I encourage you to stretch your mind, challenge your faith, and read them book or your lack of faith, as it may be if you're reading William's book. So that's it with the books. Let me get some questions here, William. Let's see. Can't we have a creator without rules? I don't know if that's for you or for me, but what do you think? Can't we have a creator without rules?
Hypothetically, my first impression is yes. I think deism would sort of be like that. That's the idea that God is the creating cause, but beyond actually setting the thing in motion has zero interaction with it. So maybe that would qualify.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe. And I have a hard time answering it because I don't believe in a creator. So but I don't know. I suppose the answer would be simply yes, sure, you can have a creator. I mean, if you're a deist, right?
Yeah, I think
Uh,
so.
yeah, you have God
I
without
don't
rules.
think deism implies any moral laws. Yeah, I could be wrong about that, but I think for deism they try to answer scientific laws with the concept of God to eliminate the infinite regress. But I don't think they imply any moral laws. So I could be wrong about that. That's an interesting question. I'd like to know why they asked that question. Maybe they could follow up at some point on that.
All right, well, homemaker calling, if you don't mind, if you have a follow-up question with that, please put it in there before I get to the end. That would be awesome because we'd like some follow-up. Let's see. Eastgate Adoptionist, thank you. You asked the question, isn't a brain in a vat still something rather than nothing? Sure, it's still something rather than nothing. Um, it would just mean we can't actually converse if we were literally just brains in a vat. That would be my conclusion. Although, maybe that's not true. Maybe they created us to be able to converse like this, but I don't know. But yes, it would definitely still be something. Absolutely. No question about that. Any
I think a
follow?
brain of that would actually prove the point of a creator,
Oh,
right?
would it now?
I
Okay.
mean, it would have to be some sort of creator, right? I mean, something
Oh,
putting it
well, I
in
guess
that,
so.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
aliens or whatever. Yeah, yeah, valid point, valid. I mean, yes, creator, just like a creator of a watch.
yeah.
Right, right. So yes, exactly. But it doesn't still substantiate some supernatural being is my point. So I mean, so I guess this brings up a really valid question. I'm glad Eastgate brought this up because to our point that we've been discussing, yes, creator and supernatural creator might be totally different concepts that we would maybe still need to flesh out. Because yes, I have no problem with people creating. I think that's wonderful. But to assume some supernatural transcendent thing because we see watches created or a brain in a vat created, I don't know that we need to leap to that. But William may disagree and think we do need to leap to that. I don't know, but I don't think so. I doubt that that would be the case. Um, let's see. What other questions do we have here? Let's see. Eastgate Adoptionist, once again, going downtown with his science questions. Man, I'm going to give these to you, William, because I continues to ask these ridiculous science questions that I just, and I've told him, I don't know your answers. That doesn't prove God exists. I just don't know the answers to all your science questions. But let's see. DNA and RNA is ordered code. Where did that code come from for the first living cell that can regulate and duplicate? Just because it's ID doesn't mean you don't have to consider it.
Yeah, okay, so the argument is from the intelligent design community is that the accumulation of information is essentially proof that God exists. Okay. Um, I think information itself is probably a fact consistent with a theistic idea of God, but it is not by itself proof that God exists. Okay. Um, information. Now, I would be honest with you, it would be difficult for me to explain how information exists and is accumulated without consciousness. And that leads us into hope. But that doesn't, I mean, we could have just became conscious by some sort of outside force. We just don't know what that is. So I get what they're saying. So what they're saying is there's accumulated information. That accumulated information seems to indicate a baseline sentience to the universe. Now I will tell you that's not a theistic claim by itself. That is a real scientific theory for people who study consciousness, that consciousness is an inherent quality of structure. It's a term called panpsychism, and it's one championed, I believe, by David Chalmers or Calmers. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but that's not a religious theory. That is a scientific theory of the emergence of consciousness. That everything has some degree of consciousness, and then when the structures get complicated enough, for some reason they begin to accumulate something like sentience. So maybe I helped confuse that a little bit more there. So
No, I'm glad you did because I had no idea, and I like whatever you just said sounded amazing. So I'm gonna follow this up with another question from Eastgate that he really wants answered for the last three episodes. So again, I'm gonna throw this to you because I don't know the answer. Why did the Planck telescope in 2013 using the CMB find that our solar system is the center of the universe and the axis of evil? Last time you were confused by axis of evil thing too, and here I am. I'm still baffled. I don't know.
well, okay, and with all due respect, and whoever's, I appreciate everybody's view. Everybody has for me, I'm not trying to come up with easy slam dunks to sound like I'm right. And to me, that's what that sounds like. If I sit here with a telescope, Alan, from my office here in Center, Alabama, it's going to appear that I'm at the center of the universe because I'm the one viewing everything, and I'm going to go in a circle. So I feel like I'm at the center of it. The same thing would work for this planet. It would seem like we're the center of the universe because we're observing from this point. So I don't think that proves that we're the center of the universe. I have zero clue what the axis of evil thing is. And if somebody could explain that to me, I'd be glad to respond, but I really don't know what that's in relationship to.
Nor do I. One more question from him.
But
Does
good job. You confused both of us.
Yeah, you baffled him. And like I told him in another forum, congratulations, you've way outwitted me when it comes to science. I have no doubts that you can run circles around me. Clearly, I don't know the answers to these questions. Again, I don't see how they have any bearing on proving the existence of God, but congratulations, you're very smart. Here's one more question. You feel free to answer it or not, William. Does the Mandelbrot set describe an infinite and virtual math layer to our reality?
We're talking about this is a multiverse theory. I'm going to say that scientifically nobody knows. Uh, there's there's a hypothesis. There's really no scientific evidence for multiverse, but there's a hypothesis, and the reason for that hypothesis is the unique nature of our universe. One way to explain how it could possibly be what it is that there are multitudes of such universes, and ours just happens to be the one that created this result. But all of these sort of no, because if that were the case, then somebody would be getting a Nobel Peace Prize, and we'd all know about it. I think it's a decent theory, but does it prove? There's a difference in something proving something and something being an interesting theory with merit. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I don't think it's proven at this point. And I don't want to act like I know exactly all the details there. I know kind of what we're talking about, but I don't know the math, and I'm not really great at math, by the way. So I have some friends I could call, and maybe they could tell me if the math works out. I don't know. But as far as I know right now, there's not any really hard scientific evidence in existence, or we're even close to, that would prove multiverse. Even though I think multiverse is an interesting theory, and quite honestly might coincide with some theistic views. But anyway, I'll leave that for another time.
Well, so I'll jump on that, and I will say that I think dark energy in and of itself kind of mixed with the Big Bang does definitely substantiate a strong case for a multiverse. So I agree with you. It hasn't been proven. It's
It's
not,
a good idea, and it may be the right idea. I
and
just
it
there's
may be
not
the
much.
right. I'm not basing my life on it. I'm not like I know that I know that I know that I know, but I will say it's not even it's not even graduated to a theory yet. I get it. I know what you're saying, but it is a great hypothesis and it makes sense and it does solve the problem of dark energy. It really does. It allows for black holes and transfer spaces to go back and forth to rejuvenate energy and continue the system and continue multiple big bangs and keep universes alive. So anyway, I love the theory. Well, it's not a theory, but the hypothesis. I think it's wonderful. I hope they do more with it. I have a feeling they're going to eventually prove that that is a reality. But we're probably so far away from proving that you and I will not be alive to see it. So unfortunately, we are at a standstill, and that's okay because we're just having fun with this question, but I have nothing to ground that in other than it sounds like a really good option. That's all I got with that. But thank you for explaining that, William. I think that was great. Homemaker calling came back with an answer to your question to give some clarification. Said, I don't see Yahweh as being the creator, but I do think we can have a creator without rules. We live in creation without interaction. I guess I'm promoting deism. Do you want to react to that? It's not a question, but do you
I
want
mean,
to?
and I would say that's fair. It's a fair. I think that's a fair sort of. I don't agree with deism. I have reasons why I don't. But I think that it's fair to say and to think about, and I think a lot of intelligent people have thought that way. People like Isaac Newton, etc., have that were deists, and they believe that. And really, to be honest with you, Alan, a lot of the arguments that I would throw at you about proving the existence of God might prove deism as well. And they might not prove theism. I'd have to do a lot of work to get you from deism to theism. So for whoever that is, I understand your arguments there. Maybe throw some challenges at me as a theist to challenge why I would be a theist versus a deist, because that would help me think and give me some stuff to swing at. So if you've got some reasons why you think theism is wrong and deism is right, maybe the next episode or in between time, shoot some comments out there so we can respond to it. I'd be glad to take that on. I'll just say with this, it's fair that you've come to that view. I don't think you're right, but I don't have to. So
Right, right. Well, I mean, to answer your, I would say that deism is just as strong as theism based on what you've presented so far. But that's just my opinion. But I'm sure we'll have plenty of weeks to discuss this further. Home caller maker calling concluded with, well, he's got another question later. I'm not sure, but he says this: I recently left Christianity and see Yahweh as a monster. This is where I'm at in my journey right now. I'll just say I agree with you, homemaker calling. Congratulations. I'm glad you escaped. William would disagree. YouTuber ultimate ultimated biblic Judeo Christian. Wow, it's a long name. Do ye system? Wow, he's using the King James. William, you ready for this? King,
yeah, I'm prepared.
do ye systematically understand God's revealing connatural, edgeless, all wiseness, the ontonic, the ontic opposite of edged, fallible humans, bro? He just
First
made
of all,
up words, man.
is this person putting this through like a translator?
I don't know
Because
what he's
I have learned that sometimes I think people are idiots and they're really just they're translating and it makes them sound. So if you're using a translator, maybe start out saying I'm using a translator. That way we know you're trying and we'll decide, because that comment really doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm
no.
gonna probably say no, I probably don't know what you're talking about because I haven't.
Yeah, I agree. If your goal is to sound smart, you failed miserably. All right, finally, homemaker calling one more comment. What about people that argue gravity doesn't exist? Things are just more dense than air. Gravity is just a word, it's not proof of anything. It's not really a question, so we don't necessarily have to respond unless you wanted to make one last comment on this.
I just to respond to that from science, that's absolutely wrong. There are multiple things going on in the universe that indicate that gravity is real. There's phenomena that happens in the universe that we can't explain without gravity being what it is. So gravity, and I'm going to throw a cheap plug in here, like God. is an answer for phenomena that we can't deny is taking place. Uh, I couldn't help it. I'm sorry, I just
That's
couldn't.
all good, man. I love these interviews. This is what I love about having you on the show, man. Like we can just have freaking fun, dude. I'm over this. We're gonna end with that. That was a great ending, dude. I loved it. So William, love you, bro. I'm so glad we're doing this show together. This is super fun. I really feel like we are answering questions. Like we're dialoguing, we're challenging each other, and I hope the people are watching and that they're gaining insights from both of our positions and hearing two honest people just genuinely try to dialogue and understand each other. So I appreciate you being a part of this, dude. This has been really
Sure.
great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Grab our books, make sure you read them. Totally worth it. And otherwise, we will see you all next week as we dialogue whether or not religion is the cause of all evils. See you all next week.